We're on chapter 3 of the medical medium brain saver, your alloy brain. Now this is a long chapter, so I'm not sure how many parts there's going to be, and we're starting to get into the thick of the book. So I like a pencil. Everyone here on planet Earth has struggled with some sort of mental battle. With each of us unique in nature, it varies from individual to individual. Many people feel they bring it upon themselves that they can create their mental trials. Others feel it comes from external problems and decisions placed upon them. Some seek out therapy and find a good counselor. No matter what, going through life has never been easy for anyone. People from all walks of life struggle with their minds. If not on a minute by minute, hourly, or daily basis, then definitely in waves or stretches of intense moments. So we already have that going on here as human beings, our basic battle to survive. Life is more than hard enough. What happens if something else gets thrown in our way, an obstacle that doesn't need to be there, something you can't even see with the eye, a sinister, hidden problem no one knows about that's in the mix? The battle in our brains. Your brain is electricity. The electricity created in your brain exists through a combination of two supernatural forces. One receiving power from the ether and the other receiving power from your soul. Plus a physical component. Your heart's and brain's programming to thrive since your inception of life. This is the foundational basis of your brain's life force and how it runs. From early experiments with electricity, remember the key in kite from history. I'm not sure what that is. To the most advanced technology we have today, there's a common thread: metal. In micro levels of the tiniest computer chips and in macro levels of power plants, when it comes to electrical energy, we've learned to employ metal. Metals used to deliver and carry electricity, to manipulate electrical currents, to pull electricity, to push it. Metal can short a circuit, put a damper on one, shift electricity, alter it, and even destroy, project, or catapult a current in so many ways not yet discovered by science. We're still learning how to play with metals in order to advance technology. Metals are profoundly connected to society. Now, if your brain is full of electrical currents, what must be involved? Metals. That's right, our brains are largely about metals and electricity. It's critical to understand this. Here's the kicker. There are both bad metals and good metals at work. On the hand, our brains can harbor mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, barium, nickel, aluminum, toxic calcium, toxic copper, toxic chromium, tin, and more. These are the bad industrialized toxic metals. On the other hand, not all metals in the brain are bad or unproductive. We rely on some critically important metals in our brains, trace minerals. These good metals include beneficial, non-industrialized forms of gold, calcium, copper, potassium, magnesium, chromium, palladium, vanadium, and more. One reason beneficial metals are there is to control electrical currents. Okay, I didn't know we had gold in our brain. Like, my brain is made of gold. Cool. I really didn't know that. Did y'all? Rogu? I'm not sure. Toxic heavy metals residing in the brain with the good metals wreak havoc. They create a battle in our brains. Living metal against dead metal. Whoa, that's pretty cool. I gotta underline that. Life-giving metal versus life-taking metal. Good versus evil. It's a physical battle going on inside our brain, on top of the battle of life on this planet. It's the problem that was never meant to be there. Before we go further, it's important to establish what I mean when I use the term toxic heavy metals. There are densities and atomic weight classifications for metals that lead some metals to be classified as heavy metals and others as light metals. These classifications aren't oriented around the metal's toxic effects inside the brain and body. They don't tell us whether a metal taking up residence inside us will wreak havoc, causing symptoms, conditions, and diseases. That's why for decades, medical medium information has redefined toxic heavy metals, classifying any and all industrialized toxic metals that take up residence inside the brain and body as toxic heavy metals, because the damage any toxic metal creates has heavy consequences in people's lives. Aluminum, for example, which is a light metal, is considered non-toxic by medical and other industries because it's not in the heavy metal classification. In truth, aluminum is neurotoxic and damaging to the brain. So it's toxic and has heavy consequences. That's why I call it a toxic heavy metal. This awareness is critical. People already don't take toxic heavy metals seriously enough. Calling some metals toxic light metals would dilute people into thinking they're not really a threat, when indeed any toxic metal, heavy or light, are a great threat, bringing misery upon humankind, with industries not taking responsibility. Trace minerals are life-giving. They're part of how our bodies are created. Toxic heavy metals are life-taking. They're part of how our bodies rapidly age and deteriorate. Good metals, in mineral form, trace minerals, contain information that comes from life sources on the planet and also life forces outside of the planet, from the solar system and galaxy. The planet is living, it's alive, it's breathing. Minerals and trace minerals are periodically falling through the planet's atmosphere. These minerals, I did not bring a thing of water. These minerals play an integral role with the mineral salts in our brain and the sugar that carries minerals and electrolytes to our brain. Oh my God. Electricity in our brain is reliant on trace minerals as fuel. Toxic heavy metals, meanwhile, can weaken, burn out, short out, twist out, interfere with toxify? Yeah. And denature our brain's natural electrical currents that allow us to think, feel, function optimally. As metals are unearthed to be used for industries, they're The restaurateur, I don't even know what this says. I really don't. And changed through the industrial process, which denatures the metals, turning them against the human body. People with low trace minerals and higher toxic metals in the brain can get emotionally triggered or literally burnt out from stress very easily, which you'll read about in chapter 7, your burnt out deficient brain. Y'all, I gotta stop. My throat gonna kill me. It's the next day, so this video is going to be in another room, and I have my juice, so throat should be good. So this is where we left off. Toxic heavy metals are elusive. They're quiet. They don't make any noise. You can't see them. You can't hear them. You certainly can't touch them. Although you can detect traces of toxic heavy metals in the bloodstream. If exposure was recent, you can't detect traces of toxic heavy metals in the tissues, organs, glands, and bones, where toxic metals settle indefinitely. Most people think bones are impermeable. Many don't realize bones are porous and highly absorbent. Metals, chemicals, and pathogens can enter bones easily. Yet the presence of toxic heavy metals is extremely dominating and extremely controlling physically, mentally, and emotionally. And because of this, toxic heavy metals are mind-altering. And many people, toxic metals rule the roost. They control someone's life. They can disempower a person, make decisions for them by getting in the way of clear thinking. Do we like this angle? I don't know, I just felt kind of close, but I didn't want to scream. Why are toxic metals so problematic? Because they're constantly interfering with electricity, which means they're constantly interfering with your brain's receiving of and communicating information. Classified medical science relies on us being exposed to toxic heavy metals to create and perpetrate a form of mind control. Are you hearing this? Classified medical science are relying on these for mind control. We need to get out our toxic heavy metals from our bodies. Do the toxic heavy metal smoothie. It is amazing, and I noticed results within 1 week, literally within 1 week. And my autism, I went from level 2 autism to not having any autistic symptoms within either 2 or 3 months, I can't remember, but having it daily for 1 month, it was astronomical. It was crazy. For example, when any toxic heavy metal lands in any area of the brain tied to language or communication, we run into developmental language issues, communication and conversation issues, language phobias, speaking phobias, Tourette's, and or inability to speak. This can also limit someone's ability to learn another language. It's not that the person who can speak 5 languages fluently is smarter than the person who has great difficulty picking up a second language. It's toxic heavy metals dampening electrical signals that makes it hard for a single language speaker to branch out. Okay, what? I have struggled to learn Spanish. I've been wanting to learn Spanish since high school. I did take Spanish in high school, but much past high school, I've been really wanting to learn it for the past 3 years because I would love to live in a Spanish-speaking country. And I've been struggling. And I've been feeling like dumb. Like, why can't I do this? And I literally was just thinking this yesterday. I'm like, how can people speak so many languages, yet here I am struggling to know a second? So this is making me be like, okay, I still have heavy metals. I still have them in me, and I need to get them out. And I've been doing medical medium information for 3 years, and although I've noticed a significant difference, there's still more. That's insane. Social anxiety, for example, extra nervousness and sweating around others, or feeling like you can't carry a conversation, can also result from toxic heavy metals affecting communication. These examples are just the beginning of how toxic heavy metals inside the brain can affect us. On top of all the other negative effects of toxic heavy metals that you'll read about in this book, Toxic heavy metals are brain inhibitors in several ways. Toxic heavy metals are brain enzyme inhibitors. Parentheses, your liver produces brain enzymes specifically for the purpose of communication, both for receiving and expressing information. These enzymes cling to neurotransmitters and act as tiny antennae for projecting information from neurotransmitters. Toxic heavy metals inhibit these enzymes. Toxic heavy metals are brain amino acid inhibitors. Toxic heavy metals destroy taurine, choline, and glutamine. Toxic heavy metals are brain protein inhibitors. Not the proteins you consume in foods, but the proteins your liver produces specifically for your brain. Toxic heavy metals entering into your hypothalamus or pituitary gland create toxic heavy metal alloys inside these glands that become hormone inhibitors, slowing down hormone production in the glands. Have you ever heard, if you were angry at someone, that the longer you stayed angry, the longer that person was living inside your head rent-free? When that happens, at least you know you were betrayed. There's some control in knowing an emotion is taking up mental space and how it got there. Toxic heavy metals, on the other hand, are living inside our heads rent-free, wreaking havoc there, and we don't even know they're present. If we don't know how toxic heavy metals are in our way, how can we handle them? Hundreds of illnesses and hundreds of symptoms are caused by toxic heavy metals, and the publicity known medical industry is unaware of this. With all we have on our plates, all the adversity we're already faced with, we don't need these hidden stumbling blocks tripping us up. One step to moving them out of our way is to see toxic heavy metals for what they are right here and right now. How metals find us. Exposure to toxic heavy metals is all around us. We're not taught about it, so we don't learn to recognize our sources of exposure. They're much closer than we think. Toxic heavy metals have plenty of avenues to enter our bodies, from toxic heavy metals that we breathe, to toxic heavy metals that we eat, to toxic heavy metals that we drink, to toxic heavy metals that we bathe in, to toxic heavy metals that we touch or apply to our skin. That's right, simply touching aluminum foil or a battery can be enough for their minute particles of metal to leach into our bloodstream. And that's not to mention the metal particles we can ingest from food prepared in certain metal cookware or food and drink served in metal containers. Toxic heavy metals can be in our indoor and outdoor air, especially if we're in the presence of toxic fragrances, scented candles, air fresheners, pesticides, or chemtrails. We even unknowingly put toxic heavy metals directly into and onto our bodies with certain cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, beverages, and other products. You'll find extensive details on these and many more sources of exposures to toxic heavy metals in this book in Chapter 20, Toxic Heavy Metals. We're getting toxic heavy metal exposure at a minuscule level on a continual basis. It's not like we're drinking a gallon of leaded gasoline and then ending up in the hospital with lead poisoning. Instead, we're getting exposure to small amounts of tiny, beyond microscopic metal particles. And we're getting these exposures repeatedly on everyday lives. A little bit here, a little bit there. You might look at a single exposure and think, no big deal. Just like people will often think a microdose of psychedelic drugs is no big deal because of the trendy advice about everything in moderation. We're getting poisoned with toxic heavy metals in moderation. And that may not seem significant until you step back and look at the bigger picture. Repeated exposure adds up. At a certain point, the toxic heavy metals in our brain and body accumulate until we reach a large poisoning at some point later in life. Although we still won't know it's toxic heavy metal poisoning. We'll get older, reach an expiration date where everything goes wrong from collecting so many toxic metals inside our brain, and we'll never know what did it. Do you know most people do not die of natural causes? A heart attack, not a natural cause. A brain aneurysm, not a natural cause. A heart failure, not a natural cause. Those are the leading causes of death, I believe, like cardiovascular issues and heart disease. If you're dying from a disease, that's not a natural cause. It doesn't matter if you were in your 90s, like, oh, they lived to a good age. No, you can live so much longer than 90. Did you guys know that 90 is young? Yeah, 90 is young. That's incredibly young. I don't want to die at my 90s. That is not a long life. And the national average, the national lifespan in America is frightening. I believe it's either in the 70s or 80s. That is so young. That's like unbelievable. Just learning. I highly suggest you guys go learn about how old we used to live to, just like 200 years back. I'm maybe I'll do some history lessons. My favorite things to do is like learn. Like that's my favorite thing, just learn. I love reading so many books. I love learning about the history. I love the human body. I love all of that stuff. Your brain's magnetic field. Once they've found their way into your bloodstream and body, how do toxic heavy metals find your brain? Metals don't just end up there by chance. Rather, when metals in your system travel through your bloodstream to your brain, when metals reach the capillaries and other blood vessels that are intertwined with and feed your brain actually draws in the metals across the blood-brain barrier. Parentheses, and even when toxic heavy metals aren't pulled in across the blood-brain barrier, their presence in the brain is problematic. Toxic heavy metal particles are so tiny that it doesn't take much to draw them into your brain. And the tinier the particle, the easier it is for the metal to cross the blood-brain barrier into brain cells and brain tissue. These toxic heavy metals end up finding their way into your brain's sanctuary of protection, congregating in critical, protected parts of your brain that house neurons that are critical to your health and well-being. Why do the metals even enter your bloodstream? And why does your brain draw metals in from your bloodstream? Let's establish a little background. Your liver is meant to be a filter for your body. Yet with everything the liver is up against, with modern exposure and modern diets, the liver very commonly becomes stagnant, sluggish, clogged up, and dysfunctional. Many toxins, including toxic heavy metals, that should have been trapped in your liver instead continue on through your bloodstream and can end up entering your brain. Your brain becomes a filter when it was never supposed to be. Toxic heavy metals reside in your liver, can also oxidate there and discharge. And this oxidative toxic heavy metal discharge material can break free and enter your bloodstream. And in this way, eventually enter your brain. This toxic heavy metal discharge runoff, like toxic heavy metal particles themselves, can cross the blood-brain barrier. You'll read more about the blood-brain barrier in part 3, called brain barriers. Brain betrayers. Some toxins remain passerby in the bloodstream, entering the brain and then leaving the brain. Toxic heavy metals are one variety of toxins of so many that never leave the brain. Whether the liver is stagnant and sluggish or not, metals can end up traveling to the brain, where they end up being magnetically drawn in. The electricity of your brain acts as a magnetic field, attracting metals into it. Does this mean your brain is working against you? That you can't trust it? Absolutely not. Your brain, like the rest of your body, is always looking out for you. Your brain's electromagnetic field is intended for a protective purpose. That the incredible ability to draw in trace minerals and electrolytes to serve you. Because of the contaminated environment we live in on this planet, created by the chemical and pharmaceutical industries, hear that out, pharmaceuticals, and the contaminated environment this creates in our body, the brain is up against more than it should be. Our brains were never supposed to deal with this on a daily onslaught of chemical warfare. We aren't meant to encounter industry-designed, seemingly good for us toxic substances at every turn, and yet we do, at a rate that's accelerating every year. So, as a side effect of your brain's miraculous skill at pulling in life-giving nutrients, such as trace minerals, it also ends up magnetically pulling in toxic heavy metals. Let's be clear that your brain's electromagnetic pull applies whether we'd classify a metal as magnetic or not. Just because nickel has a strong magnetic quality, for example, does not mean that it gets drawn into the brain more than copper, which isn't really considered magnetic. Copper and aluminum can be drawn into the brain tissue through the brain's electromagnetic field just as strongly as nickel, steel, and iron. It doesn't matter if outside the body the metal would stick to a magnet or not. It doesn't matter what type of variety of metal it is, whether toxic metal or non-toxic mineral. With the brain's magnetism, we are talking about a force, an electrical force in the brain creating a magnetic field that attracts all minerals and metals. When deposits of toxic heavy metals build up inside the brain tissue, the brain has an even larger and stronger magnetic pull towards toxic heavy metals. That's because more electricity gets funneled into the brain tissue that's saturated with metals, and more electricity in the brain creates a larger and stronger electromagnetic pull. This supernatural design was intended for trace minerals only. Our brain's supernatural electromagnetic force was meant for humankind on an industry-free planet. It was intended for attracting and igniting trace minerals with electricity to raise the intelligence of the human brain. Instead, electricity gets funneled into the industrialized toxic heavy metal deposits in our brain, in turn creating more magnetism to attract more toxic heavy metals to those existing toxic heavy metal deposits. It's the unfortunate truth of how we end up suffering. I'm going to stop there because this is just a long chapter and I don't know how long these videos should be. So, all right, that is part 1 of your alloy brain.